guys, Danny Wu here. Welcome back to Design 1. This is, I believe, week 11. And today we're going to be talking about two different things. Responsive website development for going from different screen sizes, from a desktop to a laptop to iPad to a mobile phone device. And then we're also going to talk about CSS frameworks. So a framework is basically just like pre-written CSS code that you can use out of the box rather than creating your own. There's lots of different frameworks out there, and we'll just talk about a few of them. But yeah, that's what we're going to cover today. So the first thing I want to talk about is responsive website development. So again, responsive website development just means that you're programming your website to automatically change the design and style and layout based off of the width of the screen that the user is viewing it on. So obviously, if you're on a desktop, you have a much wider screen, much wider browser to be looking at the website. But as you go to like a smaller computer, like a laptop or an iPad or a tablet of some kind, or an iPhone or Android, you have to think about the design, the look and feel, and the user experience of your website on all of those different screens and sizes. So when it comes to website development for responsive websites, there are two main methods that I mainly focus on. One is using percentages for widths rather than fixed pixels. So instead of doing like 900 pixels wide for your container document, for your container on your website, I would suggest doing 100%. And then also working alongside percentages with max width values. So if you don't want it to go beyond like 1,000 pixels wide, if you're opening your window up really wide or viewing it on a very large screen, then you could say, okay, I want the width to be 100%, but I want the max width to be like 1,000 pixels. So it'll never go over 1,000 pixels wide. But if it scales down below 1,000 pixels, then it'll be the width of the browser window, essentially. The second thing that is good to use are called app media breakpoints. So app media is another part of CSS that allows you to, say, detect the width of the browser or width of the device window that you're viewing the website on, and say any website that is below, or any device that is below 700 pixels wide, then I can change the styles in my CSS, whether that's changing the color or the typeface or type size or location of your navigation. That's what you can use app media breakpoints for. So the combination of these two things, percentages with max width values and app media breakpoints, is really kind of the basics and base behind responsive web development. So let's just talk a little bit about each one of these. So this is an example of how you can use percentages and max width together. So if I have a containing div that is basically containing all my content on my website, and I want it to scale down based off the width of the browser window, then I can give it a width of 100%. So it'll be 100% the width of the browser window. But again, on large screens or really wide browsers, you probably don't want it to be like 5,000 pixels wide. So that's why you add on top of this a max width value. That's a pixel width. So 900 pixels is my max width value for this div. So it's never going to get larger than that. And then I just added a background color so we could visually see it on the screen too. So why don't we do this together? I'm using glitch.com as a programming environment. So I'm going to go to Glitch and set up a new document, and then we could play around with these percentages and max width values to see how they actually work. So if you go to glitch.com and log in or create an account, and then we could go to New Project and say, let's just do Hello Website. And we're going to simplify this because we don't really need all the different files and HTML and CSS that's in this. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete the README and the to-do. And we really don't need JavaScript yet, so I'm going to delete the JavaScript too. And then in my HTML file, I'm going to go ahead and just delete everything and just start fresh. Same thing in the CSS document. Okay, so let's just keep it as simple as possible and start from there. So I'm going to create an HTML file, give it a head, and give it a body. And then in the head, I want to link my CSS file. So I'm going to link my href CSS file is style.css. And I have to label that as a style sheet. And let's also just give it a title too. Let's call this responsive demo. Okay. And then I'm just going to add in the body a div and just add some text in here. This is a test for responsive website development! Exclamation. Okay. And I have my window, my preview window open on the right-hand side. So we can see this being updated live and what it's going to look like when someone loads it in the browser. So in our CSS, let's add some styles for that div. So let's give it a background color so we can see it, the box shape essentially. Okay, so it's by default it's going to be 100% wide. But let's just see what it looks like with a fixed width. So let's give it a width of 500 pixels. Okay, so we have a fixed width here. And if we scale this down, we can see that there's a scroll bar and it doesn't scale down with the browser window. That's because we're defining it as a width of 500 pixels, so it's always going to be 500 pixels. So instead of doing that, we're going to do 100%, and then it scales down and there's no scroll, which is good. But if we want to make this really big, the website probably shouldn't be that massive when it comes to the width. So let's go ahead and add a max width. And let's set that to 900 pixels. Okay, so now we have a max width that it won't get larger than 900 pixels, but if it gets smaller than 900 pixels, then it's going to be 100% the browser width. So again, there's no scroll here, which is what we want. So it's just scaling down. Again, below 900 pixels is scaling down to the width of the browser. But if you go above 900 pixels, then it's going to be 900 pixels wide, which is great. That's basically what we want. So we're basically avoiding doing something like this with a width that's fixed and having the scroll bar here. We don't want that. So again, that's why we do a width of 100 pixels, or sorry, a width of 100% and a max width of whatever width we don't want it to go above. Cool. Just so for my own sanity, I like to center things. So let's just give it a margin of 0 pixels in auto so it's centered. Okay, cool. Looks good. And then again, scale. And it goes to the width of the browser width once it goes below 900 pixels wide. All right, very cool. So the next thing that is going to come in handy is app media breakpoints. So in CSS, you can use app media to define when a screen or browser width is at a certain point, and you can say, okay, if it's a maximum or minimum width of 600 pixels, or you could do a range between 600 and 800 pixels, then inside of these curly brackets, these app media curly brackets, you can add more CSS to override any of the general CSS that's above. Usually I put this at the bottom of my CSS file. So this will override anything once it, in this case, goes below 600 pixels wide. So app media, only screen, and max width of 600 pixels. So again, below 600 pixels, we're going to change the background color of that div to a light blue. Okay, let's go ahead and try that. So app media, only screen, and we want to give a max width breakpoint 600 pixels. And then inside of these two curly brackets, we can add more CSS. That's most likely going to be related to what's above. And we can override, in this case, the background color to be light blue. So once it gets below 600 pixels, then the background color is going to change from a red to a light blue. So let's scale this down. And once it gets to 600 pixels, then the background should change. So that's the breakpoint. So it's going from red to light blue when it goes below 600 pixels. And you can change any CSS styling for this as well. So let's say we had a text size here of 12 pixels. And, font size of 12 pixels, and then a font size, once it goes below 600 pixels, of 24 pixels. Let's just double it. Okay, so as we scale down, it should change the color and the font size. So again, you could apply any CSS styling for breakpoints. So one good example is for like navigation. You can have one design for the navigation for desktop, and then another design for the navigation for mobile. A lot of people go from like a desktop to a mobile, and on a mobile device, they have like the hamburger menu where it looks like 3 lines. You click on those lines, and then it does a drop-down navigation. So stuff like that is how you would use app media breakpoints to basically create a slightly different design for different devices and different screen sizes that's more appropriate and more user-friendly on that size, on that phone or the tablet or desktop. So that's kind of the essentials behind it. One other thing that we should probably talk about when it comes to website development for responsive devices is to make it mobile friendly. You need to add this little bit of metadata for a viewport to make it load appropriately on a mobile device. If you don't add this scaling and device width to the viewport here in your head, then it's just going to load the website as if it were loading it on a desktop computer or laptop. So it'll look very small, essentially. So we could take a look at this before we add this. Let's check it out first. So let's open this up in a new window. So again, scale it down. Once you get to 600, then it changes color. And then in Google Chrome, there should be a developer toolkit under View. You might have to toggle this on in your preferences if it's not there. But if we go to Developer Tools, and then we could see on the upper left-hand side in this Developer Tools console, there's a little icon that looks like a computer and a phone overlapping. So if we click on this, we can view our website, or at least see what our website would look like on different devices. So if we click on this, you can change the dimensions for different iPhones, Samsung Galaxy, Surface Pros, etc. But as you can see, it looks really teeny here, so you can't even read it. So if we go back to our HTML and add that little meta tag in our head, so if we do meta name equals viewport, content equals width equals device width, comma, initial scale equals 1. And then we can close that. Okay, so now when we go back to this and reload it, it should look more appropriate. So because the width is below 600, the width here is 375 pixels, then we're below that 600 pixel breakpoint in our app media CSS. So the background is blue and the text is 24 pixels instead of 12 pixels. You can also rotate this. So when we rotate this, the width is 667 pixels, which is above 600. So it goes back to the background being red and the text being 12. So you can go back and forth to see what it looks like in different views, but it's loading how it should on the device because of the viewport meta tag. Cool. So that's kind of the basics behind responsive website development. Again, it's all about using percentages, max width values, and app media breakpoints. And then again, for mobile friendly scaling, you have to add this little meta tag here for viewport. That'll scale it to the right size depending on the device that you're looking at, the mobile device that you're looking at. All right, so that is responsive web development in a nutshell, just the basics. The next thing I want to talk about is CSS frameworks. So a CSS framework is a pre-prepared library that is meant to be used as a basis for designing and developing websites. It provides a standard structure for CSS code, helping web developers and designers to build web pages more efficiently and with better consistency. There are a number of different CSS frameworks out there that you can use. Again, this is just pre-written code that you can reference and then reference the classes and IDs that are associated with the framework, CSS framework. These are some of the main ones that are popular. So there's UIKit, which is standard user interface design, like plugins. There's Bluma, which is another kind of general purpose CSS framework. Tailwind CSS, I think, is for general purpose and responsive website design. Foundation is specifically for responsive website design. And then Bootstrap, which was originally designed by Twitter years ago, is a general purpose CSS toolkit that has like stuff for layout design, headers and typography, columns, so lots of helpful things, and we'll talk about that in a second and the pros and cons that go along with using a framework. But I think the first thing that we could do is just kind of play around with it. So the one that is most popular is Bootstrap for the CSS framework. So let's go ahead and play around with that one first. So when it comes to any great framework, what makes it great is, yes, the code, but also the documentation. So if there isn't good documentation, that's probably not a good framework for you to use. Bootstrap has a great documentation website, so we're going to go to that real quick first. I'll try and link to it in the class website as well, so it's a little easier to get to, but this is the direct URL for it. Or you can just like Google it and it'll pop up. So let's go to Twitter Bootstrap. Sorry, just Bootstrap. And let's go to the Get Started section and the Introduction section. So that makes it really easy for you to just kind of copy and paste the code. So here's a just basic index page that includes the viewport. So let's go ahead and copy that. And let's go back to our glitch account and let's see, let's create a new account, or sorry, a new project. So again, go to hello website and create a new website. And again, we're just going to clean it up, get rid of all the unnecessary documents. So let's just get rid of that. Get rid of to do, and delete everything from index, JavaScript, and CSS. And then in our index, again, we copied this code from the quick start on Bootstrap. And let's go ahead and paste that in our index file. So we got our hello world working pretty good. Okay, now if we scroll down, we can see, okay, there's some more we could add. So they add a link to the Bootstrap CSS. So we probably need that as well. So let's just, we can just copy this whole thing too and just replace the other HTML. So let's just delete this and paste it there. And as you can see on the right hand side, the font changed from the default, I think it was Times New Roman or something, to something a little nicer and, you know, sans serif-y. So this includes the Bootstrap CSS document, and Bootstrap also has a JavaScript framework for you to use as well, so it includes that too. But we're mainly going to focus on the CSS side of things. So this is basically all you need to get going. This is the framework, so as long as it's attached to your HTML document, then you can start using the classes and objects that are included in the framework. If you're curious, you can just copy this CSS link and put it directly into the browser to see what the code looks like. Oops. So let's go ahead and try that. So if we copy that, paste it in the browser window, and this is all of the CSS code that's related to Bootstrap. It's a lot. It's also hard to read because it's also minified. What that means is it just deleted all the unnecessary returns and spaces that's in the code. But if you delete this .min here in the browser window and reload it, then you could see it in a more user-friendly, easier to read format. So these are all the different CSS styling classes that you can use that are referenced in the CSS code. It's a lot, and again, it's general purpose, so there's good and bad things to doing this and using it, and I'll talk about the pros and cons in a second, but again, let's just kind of move forward and play around with it a little bit more. So back to the documentation in Bootstrap. You can scroll down on the left-hand side and say, okay, there's stuff for layout. Let's look at containers. Okay, let's try adding this container, so I'm going to copy that and paste it into our body here. And let's just add that hello world inside of that container. Okay, so it looks like it's center aligned now, which is kind of cool. And now it scales down and up as you get larger and smaller, which is nice. What else is there? So there's grids. So if you wanted to have like a 3-column grid, then you can copy this code and paste it in here. Let's do it underneath Hello World. And I'm gonna clean this up a little bit. Okay, and then you see it added here. So we have our columns there. So you can add text in here. This is some text. This is more text. You can add images in there. An image should go here. And then as it scales down or up, it scales with it appropriately. So all the responsive aspects of it are also included, which is nice. There's different typographic content as well. There's images, image styling. There's table styling. Forms. So if you wanted a form, you can include that too. So here's a simple email and password form. So if I copy that, go back, put it inside of the container. And then we have a form right there. Again, this is just front end, so there's no sort of back end attached to it. So this form does nothing, doesn't really send anything, but it's nicely styled versus if we didn't have, let's just comment out the CSS. If we didn't have the CSS, that's what it would look like. So without Twitter Bootstrap, without Bootstrap attached to it, then it's just going to look like this. But with Bootstrap attached, then it adds pretty decent styling, pretty decent layout stuff. So it's helpful to get started. A lot of startups use Bootstrap to like create an MVP, a minimal viable product for their like websites that they're building, and it's mainly because they don't have design staff or full-time development and time to dedicate to creating custom design. So that's why a lot of these startups have very similar looks and feels to their websites, because they're using frameworks to quickly get a website live and up and running. But it's good for some things, but there's definitely some cons to it. So yeah, there's tons of other stuff in here. If you have CSS attached to it, then you can use these components, or sorry, if you have JavaScript framework attached to it with the CSS framework attached to it, then you could use some of these components as well, like accordion for content. So since we do have both linked to this, we can do that as well. So let me just add this to the bottom. Again, it's just copy and pasting. And then we have our own accordion little bit of content here, which is kind of nice. But again, this wouldn't work if we didn't have the JavaScript framework associated to it. So if I comment that out, then that's not going to work anymore. But the styling's still there. So uncomment, and then it works again. So that is kind of the basics behind Bootstrap and frameworks in general. So again, you just have to have the link to the framework, and then go through the documentation to see how you can use the framework by using these different classes and IDs that are associated with the framework. So as long as these classes and IDs are the same, then the styling would be applied to them. So again, if we go back to containers, this had a class of container, and then there's different kinds of containers. So container SM, which is small, medium, large, extra large, extra large. And this, again, playing around with responsive web development too, with max widths and percentages. So that's all baked in for you, which is nice. And then you can override some of this content, but it makes it a little bit challenging. But it's useful just to get like a basic website up there. If you don't really care too much about the look and feel, the style of it. It's just going to be whatever is styled in Bootstrap. But again, you can override some of those like colors or typefaces or sizes if you wanted to in your own CSS document. But again, that gets a little tricky and messy. Okay, so that's Bootstrap. Again, there are lots of different CSS frameworks out there that you can choose from and play around with if you so choose to do that for your own websites. Here is a list of some of the better ones to use that are categorized based off of different ways of using those frameworks. So I recommend checking this out too. It's just, again, someone on GitHub put this together, and I think it's pretty good and helpful list. So like I said, there are pros and cons when it comes to using frameworks. Some of the pros are it's much more efficient and faster to get a website up and running using something like Bootstrap. Because the framework is built and designed on a specific design system, it's going to be consistent when it comes to the look and feel and how you use it across the board. When it comes to worrying about responsive website development or cross-browser compatibility, so sometimes CSS works well in like Chrome, but it doesn't work as good in Safari or Internet Explorer. That could be challenging to do user testing for and plan for in your own custom code. But most of these frameworks, because they're updated regularly, have that covered. So you don't have to worry about responsive website design or responsive website development, or worrying about the difference in how it looks from one browser window, one browser to another. There's also a great community behind a lot of these platforms because a lot of them are used by a lot of different people. So there's lots of tutorials and lots of people out there to help and assist with any issues we might have. And the documentation, for the most part, is really great, especially when it comes to larger frameworks like Bootstrap. Their documentation is really helpful. And then again, because this is run and created by organizations or a group of individuals, these frameworks are being constantly updated. So there's constantly new versions happening. So they keep up with all the latest and greatest, all the potential bugs and new versions of browsers or operating systems. So you don't have to worry about that, which is kind of nice. When it comes to the other side of things, when it comes to the cons of using frameworks, because especially when it comes to general purpose CSS frameworks, there's tons of code in there that you probably will never use. So you're loading all this code. It takes maybe a couple seconds to load for the user, but you're only using maybe like 20% of it. So that could be an issue. There is a learning curve. You have to go through the documentation to understand how to use these frameworks. Customization is sometimes challenging. So if you wanted to change the design or the look and feel of a button, that could be a little bit challenging to do. You basically have to override some of the styles in the framework with your own CSS document. Dependency, you are dependent on these frameworks. So if for some reason the framework isn't working, or like the server that's hosted on goes down, or it's no longer being supported or updated by the organization or community, then you're kind of out of luck. And then the last con is, like I said, a lot of like startups that are trying to get something live online quickly use these frameworks. So the design and look and feel of a lot of those websites look very similar to each other. So if you are concerned about having a unique look and feel, then using a framework probably isn't the best way to go. So that is basically it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But if you want to play around with these frameworks or make your website responsive, then I recommend it. Definitely recommend trying to make your website responsive so it looks good on all devices. When it comes to frameworks, feel free to explore. It's not for everyone, but it's helpful in some areas over others. But for designers, I feel like it'd be more frustrating than helpful because we care about the style, we care about the look and feel, and modifying that, updating it, and changing it based off of a framework can be challenging and a bit of a headache. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that was eye-opening. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need any help with anything. All right, thanks.